Across Europe, leaders urgently seek a blend of peace, defense, and humanitarian backing for Ukraine, along with decisive actions against Russia and solid protection strategies globally. The world now watches every move coming out of the European Union with anticipation. A disappointing meeting between Trump and Zelensky in Washington has increased doubts about Ukraine's conflict, stirring global unrest and European worries even more deeply. Europe now needs to craft a united plan to protect itself while continuing aid for Ukraine right away. During these trying times, Europe's key nations are gathering in London for an urgent summit immediately. At the heart of the UK-hosted meeting is a focus on ongoing military help for Ukraine and finally ending the conflict once and done. Just a day earlier, UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer and Ukraine's President Zelensky held an urgent face-to-face talk briefly. Following that discussion, the UK declared it would send a huge $2.8 billion package to help Ukraine recover and boost its defenses immediately. Today, officials are set to sign a special loan deal called the UK-Ukraine Revenue Acceleration Agreement. This new agreement adds to the existing yearly support of £3 billion from Britain for Ukraine without delay. It is also known that Britain plans to deploy soldiers along with Typhoon fighter jets to Ukraine. With these actions, Britain nearly confronts Moscow in a bold. How will these worldwide shifts affect Europe's safety and power balance as global forces rearrange their positions? What new role will London's backing of Ukraine play in this evolving scenario undoubtedly? Are you still watching? Awesome. Please do not forget to subscribe to our channel, turn on notifications, and give us a like to stay up to date with our videos. Let's dive in. The UK has made a deal with Kiev to give Ukraine a $2.84 billion loan, secured by money from frozen Russian assets. This special loan is part of the G7's Rapid Revenue Boost plan and was signed when Zelensky visited London to meet with Keir Starmer. At a press conference with Zelensky, Starmer told reporters that the G7 fully supports Ukraine. UK Finance Minister Rachel Reeves and Ukraine's Finance Minister Sergei Marchenko are scheduled to sign the new UK-Ukraine agreement. Marchenko said, "The UK remains a steadfast defender of Ukraine. Today's deal, which boosts Ukraine's defense abilities, shows that clearly. The funds will help buy the right defense gear for Ukraine." The Finance Ministry explained that the £2.26 billion loan is meant to strengthen Ukraine's military and will be repaid with profits from sanctioned Russian state assets. This move highlights the UK's commitment to keeping Ukraine safe. A strong Ukraine is essential for the UK's own security. The entire loan is dedicated to buying military supplies to fortify Ukraine, with the first installment set to be sent next week. It is clear that, under international law, Russia must cover the costs for the damage it has caused in Ukraine. This G7 deal, supported by profits from Russian state assets under sanctions, is an important step toward making sure that happens. The funds will be delivered in 3 equal yearly payments of £752 million. Announcing the loan deal also comes on top of the UK's promise to provide £3 billion per year in military support to Ukraine. The loan follows the Prime Minister's pledge to boost UK defence spending to 2.5% of gross domestic product by 2027. And if the economic conditions are favorable, the UK might even increase defense spending to 3% of GDP in the next parliament. Along with this financial help, the Starmer government has also opened the door to more military and arms support. In January, during a meeting in Kiev on January 16th, Zelensky and Starmer signed a 100-year partnership deal. This wide-ranging agreement covers cooperation in military matters, energy, science, culture, economics, and many other areas. There have even been talks for months about sending British Typhoon fighter jets to Ukraine and deploying over 10,000 peacekeepers there. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer recently announced that he is ready to send British troops to Ukraine to enforce any peace deal. He explained that any effort to secure Ukraine's safety also helps protect our entire continent and our country. This was the first time Starmer openly mentioned sending British troops to Ukraine. When French President Emmanuel Macron first proposed sending Western peacekeepers to Ukraine last year, other allies turned down the idea. However, the plan has gained momentum in recent months, especially before Mr. Trump's inauguration. Meanwhile, the UK is also open to giving Typhoon jets to the Ukrainian Air Force, but making that move would require a long-term plan, including pilot training, logistical support, and arranging for spare parts. Britain gives us the go-ahead. We can train our pilots really fast, Kyiv noted. They believe that having Typhoon jets soar above Ukraine would boost defense and might even let them go on the offense against Russian planes. Naturally, there is a worry that this might spark a big fight between NATO and Russia. Still, it looks like Britain is leaning toward the idea. They seem ready to say, let's send the Typhoons if we need to, or at least start training pilots, rather than worrying like the debates in the US over whether to send F-35 jets. Meanwhile, Russia calls Britain's actions aggressive. Russian officials in Moscow say that using frozen Russian money to help Ukraine breaks international rules. In the same way, when people started talking about Britain sending troops to Ukraine, Russian newspapers said, London is playing with fire, even though London hasn't officially said they'll send a full battalion of soldiers. It does seem that they plan to send instructors, advisors, and special forces. This wouldn't mean going to war directly with Russia, but it would still give Ukraine a big boost in defending itself. Starmer's team says that Britain is also working hard on the peace side of things by hosting a special meeting for leaders to talk about Ukraine. This meeting wraps up a super busy week of talks for the Prime Minister. He is not only spending more on defense, but has also flown to Washington, D.C. to have helpful discussions with President Trump about keeping Britain and Europe safe. After meeting with Trump and Ukrainian President Zelensky in Washington, the Prime Minister met again with both leaders. Later that morning, he welcomed Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni to Downing Street before heading to the meeting in the heart of London. At the meeting, leaders from Denmark, the Netherlands, Norway, Poland, Spain, Finland, Sweden, the Czech Republic, and Romania are joining too. They've also announced that Turkey's top diplomat will come along. The British Prime Minister has invited big names too. The head of NATO, the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, and the European Council President Antonio Costa. Later, Ukrainian President Zelensky, French President Emmanuel Macron, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, and Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau will all join the talks. This gathering of European leaders is seen as very important for peace in Ukraine. The plan is for these leaders to focus on more military help for Ukraine and to put more economic pressure on Russia so that Ukraine can stand up better. They will also chat about how to set up a lasting peace deal, how Ukraine can stop any future Russian bullies, and how to promise strong security for everyone. Keir Starmer announced that he plans to share a peace idea with US President Donald Trump after this London meeting. Sir Keir mentioned that after his recent talks with Zelensky, Macron, and Trump, there was a promise that Britain would join with Paris, and maybe one or two other nations, to work with Kiev on a plan to end the fighting. The Prime Minister added that after coming up with the plan, they would talk it over with the US. As clear messages of support come out of the London meeting, everyone is watching closely. Prime Minister Starmer made it very plain. All of Britain stands with Ukraine. Many European leaders have promised to help the people of Ukraine too. However, the meeting in London today is crucial because it is when they will finally announce clear steps, plans, and promises for supporting Ukraine. Things have changed. Europe must act now. That is the strong feeling coming from Ukraine. But does it make sense to keep trying to choose between Washington, Europe, and Kiev when the United States, the one that has backed Western safety for 80 years, now seems like an uncertain friend? Some British experts and politicians, even those who have always been close to the Atlantic, are starting to think that the Western alliance is falling apart. One former Foreign Secretary of Gordon Brown even said that while the idea of the West isn't dead, its current version is very sick. Peter Ricketts, who used to advise David Cameron on national security, believes that Starmer should drop his hope of acting as a bridge to the United States. He argues that this old British way of thinking is not very helpful. The challenge for the West is huge, but the alliance has faced tough times before. There are plenty of strong reasons on both sides of the Atlantic that might save the partnership. There are also many good arguments to keep the alliance strong and to ensure that the United States stays active in Europe. Europe itself can show a lot about why America is far stronger when it stands together with its friends. Back in the early 1990s, some people even talked about breaking up NATO slowly after the Warsaw Pact ended. But since Russia started changing the rules over the past 20 years, NATO hasn't just held on. It's grown stronger. It is now more united, has more members, and is better at scaring off threats. The Trump years, though, caused a big problem of trust. For the first time, European leaders began to wonder if the United States was still really committed to NATO and its role as the leader of the alliance. Yet the story isn't simple. It is important to remember that even Trump had a key role in defending Ukraine. Ukraine managed to push back a huge Russian invasion in February 2022 and survive because, during Trump's first term, the United States began sending Ukraine powerful weapons like the Javelin anti-tank missile. Without those javelins, Russian forces might have taken over Kiev in just a few days, as they originally planned. So, it isn't too wild to say that Ukraine owes a lot of its survival in those critical early days of 2022 to support from the Trump White House. Why would Washington now want to walk away from this amazing story? It's a story about American and Ukrainian determination to defend the freedom and rights of a free country. The United States also knows very well that leaving Europe to face Russia on its own would be very dangerous. Back in 2014, after Russia took control of Crimea and started to occupy parts of eastern Ukraine, Washington chose to let Europe handle most of the conflict with Moscow. At that time, the main way to try and fix the situation was through something called the Minsk process. Leaders got together in talks to figure out how to calm things down in eastern Ukraine. There was also a group called the Normandy Four, made up of France, Germany, Russia, and Ukraine, that met over several years, from 2014 to 2022, trying to find a peaceful solution. Sadly, both the Minsk talks and the Normandy meetings did not work out. With the US stepping back, Russia felt free to push further, and this eventually led to the big invasion in February 2022. Fast forward to more recent times, neither the early Trump team nor President Biden repeated the old mistake of leaving Ukraine's problems to the Europeans. Instead, they decided to take charge and lead a strong international effort to help Ukraine. The new approach by the Trump team is all about taking the lead to finally end this long conflict, a war that has lasted over 11 years since Russia started its actions back then. In many ways, it's in Europe's best interest to welcome this active role from the United States. By getting involved, Washington can prevent itself from turning its focus too much toward China and moving away from Europe. But for this plan to work, both sides of the Atlantic, Europe, and the United States need to trust each other. Once that trust gap is closed, the next big challenge is to create and agree on a solid plan for Ukraine's future. Most importantly, Ukraine must have a say in the final plan. They need to be sure that any agreement is fair and doesn't end up giving away too much. Without Ukraine and Europe working closely together, even the best peace ideas could fall apart before they really get going. That's why it is so important for the United States to quickly work out a peace deal with President Zelensky and other Ukrainian leaders. There was even a big meeting on February 28th at the White House to discuss this. But the big question remains: is the United States still the power that Europe can count on? The tensions between Washington and Kyiv also highlight Europe's role in keeping the peace. The American military has grown stronger in Europe over recent years, but it still can't match the huge numbers of Russian troops in Ukraine and along Russia's western borders. Washington has made it clear that it won't send its own troops into Ukraine. This means that the Trump team really needs help from European partners. That's why the US is asking European countries to step in and make sure any peace deal with Ukraine can be enforced. But in return, Europeans need to be bold enough to share their own ideas and demands. Taking a page from the old American Revolutionary War slogan, "No taxation without representation," European leaders are saying that there should be no military moves unless all sides get a seat at the peace talks. And they know one thing very well: any deal that is made is not just about splitting up Ukraine or calling for a quick stop to the fighting. It has to be a long-lasting plan that brings real security and peace. There is also a big need for a fresh kind of leadership in Europe, one that can protect important security interests and mend the broken parts of the alliance. European nations must show they are ready to take on a bigger role so that the whole group becomes even stronger together. Countries like France, Germany, Poland, and other friendly neighbors should consider starting a major defense project. They could form a core team that speaks with one clear voice on matters of security. Imagine a European defense club where decisions are made together, and even the United Kingdom has a big say. The group's goals would include setting up a unified market for defense, making and sharing military supplies, and training soldiers together. For the nuclear-armed countries like France and the United Kingdom, there would be plans to boost the EU's role in protecting all its members. Perhaps the most clever idea for the Trump team to bring both Europe and Ukraine together for peace is to bring back an old meeting format that the United States once invented in the 1990s. This format helped create unity and a shared sense of purpose back then, and it could do the same job now. Washington can be reminded that it created this smart and successful way of doing diplomacy, and that it should be proud of this invention. In Ukraine, it might be just the tool needed to finally stop the war. Over 30 years ago, a diplomat named Richard Holbrooke wrote an article called "America, a European Power." He predicted that in the 21st century, Europe would still rely on active American help, a key part of keeping the continent balanced for many years. His article ended with a strong message. The challenge ahead is as tough as it is important. If we ignore this challenge now, the cost later will be much higher. So yes, Europe really needs the United States to end the war in Ukraine, and at the same time, the US will need Europe's support to do it well. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell for more updates.